What if I told you that some of Italy's finest wines begin with nothing more than grapes and trust? No added yeast, no sugar, just the quiet power of nature working in the dark. In remote vineyards and centuries-old cellars, Italians still make wine the way their ancestors did. Slow, wild, and almost mystical. Each harvest becomes a gamble, guided not by formulas but by instinct. Every barrel hides a story, every fermentation a small miracle. This is wine born from the land alone, shaped by sun, skin, and time. Today we pull back the cellar door and uncover 10 ancient techniques behind Italy's purest wines, and the first secret lies right where you'd least expect it, resting on the skin of the grape. Run your fingers over a ripe Italian grape at harvest and you'll notice something strange, a faint dusty bloom, a whisper of white. Most people wipe it away without thinking, yet this delicate film holds one of nature's quiet miracles. It is alive, clinging to every grape, like a secret waiting to breathe. This is wild yeast. Invisible to the eye, essential to the wine. For centuries, Italians have trusted it more than anything found in a packet. The story begins long before stainless steel tanks and precision tools. In the hills of Tuscany, Piedmont, and Sicily, early winemakers noticed their crushed grapes would bubble on their own. No additives, no sweeteners, just fruit and time. They realized that nature had already done the work. The wind carried yeast from forests, orchards, and soil, settling softly onto grape skins as they ripened under the sun. Every vineyard developed its own fingerprint, a unique blend of yeast strains shaped by climate, altitude, and history. Italians believed these yeasts were the soul of the land itself. When the grapes were harvested and crushed, the wild yeast awakened. It fed on the natural sugars, turning juice into wine with a rhythm no human could teach. The fermentation was unpredictable, alive, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always honest. The secret to its preservation lies in balance. The grapes must be harvested at the right moment when their skins are firm, their sugars high, and their yeast thriving. If the fruit is healthy, the yeast is healthy. And if the yeast is healthy, the wine can last years, even decades, without a drop of added sugar or commercial yeast. To this day, traditional Italian winemakers refuse to wash their grapes. They refuse to sterilize away the very character that defines their wine. A bottle made from wild yeast doesn't just taste of fruit. It tastes of harvest mornings, mountain breezes, and the very soil that raised it. And as that yeast begins its quiet dance in the fermenting vat, another choice awaits the winemaker. A choice that can make or break the entire vintage. A choice rooted in patience, sunlight, and the perfect moment to pick. Pick up a ripe Italian grape in late September and you'll notice a pale, powdery haze coating its skin. This faint dust is more than a quirk of nature. It's the foundation of one of humanity's oldest arts. That haze is wild yeast, carried by wind, insects, and time. And Italians have relied on it long, before written history ever acknowledged it. The earliest evidence of spontaneous fermentation in Italy dates to around 1200 BCE, during the Etruscan era in central Italy, where large clay jars called dolia were discovered with traces of wine. Later, by 200 BCE, Romans perfected these methods, using local yeasts from grape skins in regions like Campania, Lazio, and Tuscany. They learned that grapes harvested at full ripeness naturally carried enough wild yeast to spark fermentation without additions, a discovery that shaped Italian winemaking for the next 2 millennia. In places like Piedmont's Langhe Hills and Tuscany's Chianti region, families carried on these traditions uninterrupted. Before modern enology arrived in the 19th century, nearly all Italian wine was fermented with the yeast already present on grape skins. Farmers noticed that crushed grapes would bubble and foam without any intervention. No commercial yeast, no sugar, just the land itself awakening its own fruit. The preservation secret behind this ancient method lies in timing. Grapes harvested in late September or early October, when skins thicken and sugars peak, hold the highest concentrations of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. The wild yeast strain best suited for fermentation. As long as grapes remain unwashed, these yeast cells stay attached to their skins, ready to come alive the moment they meet the juice. This natural fermentation creates wines that are not just beverages, but fingerprints of their birthplace. A Nebbiolo from Barbaresco, fermented with its native yeast, tastes different from one made a few hills away in Barolo. Simply because the yeast communities differ. And today, as more winemakers return to nothing-added traditions, wild yeast wines are prized for their honesty and terroir. Yet for all this magic hidden in grape skins, Italian winemaking holds another ancient secret, one that begins not with yeast at all, but with the ripeness of the fruit itself. Picture an Italian vineyard in the last weeks of September. The sun hangs low over the hills, turning the rows of vines into rivers of gold. Winemakers walk slowly between them, lifting clusters, feeling their weight, testing the skin between their fingers. This isn't just harvesting, it is listening. Because in traditional Italian winemaking, The moment you pick the grape determines everything. And when you are making wine, with no added yeast or sugar, the grapes must be fully ripe, not a day early, not a day late. This practice stretches back thousands of years. The Etruscans, around 800 BCE, left carvings in central Italy depicting grape harvests timed to the autumn equinox. Later, the Romans documented ideal harvest windows in texts like Columella's De Re Rustica, written in the 1st century CE, noting that grapes needed maximum sweetness when fermenting on their own. They understood something profound. Ripe grapes don't just taste better, they carry more natural sugar, and more sugar means stronger fermentation. Fully ripe grapes also develop thicker skins. Those skins hold higher concentrations of natural yeast. They also contain more tannins and flavor compounds. All of this becomes crucial when no external yeast or sugar will be added. Italians learned that if they waited for that perfect ripeness in regions like Tuscany, Veneto, and Puglia, the fermentation would begin confidently and finish cleanly. No hesitation, no stalling, no need for intervention. Modern Italian winemakers still follow the old rhythm. Early mornings in late September, long walks through their vines, tasting berry after berry until they know instinctively that the fruit is ready. Fully ripe grapes can withstand longer fermentations. They protect themselves with natural acidity. They create wines that age gracefully in cellars from Piedmont to Sicily. And culturally, this moment of harvest is sacred. It brings villages together for the vendemmia, the traditional gathering that has marked the Italian calendar for centuries. Children, grandparents, neighbors, all united by the sun, the soil, and the pulse of ripeness. Yet as the last basket is carried from the vineyard, another ancient secret waits. A technique older than the Middle Ages, designed to jumpstart fermentation naturally and powerfully without a single modern tool. Before the main harvest begins, when the vineyard is still quiet and the air is warm with late summer sweetness, Italian winemakers perform one of their oldest rituals. They create the pied de cuve. It is small, humble, and almost secret, yet it holds the power to transform thousands of liters of grape juice into living wine, without a single added grain of yeast or spoon of sugar. The origins of this method stretch back to the Middle Ages, particularly in regions like Piedmont, Friuli, and Tuscany, where winemakers noticed that certain fermentations began faster and more reliably than others. They realized that if they picked a small amount of perfectly ripe grapes a few days early, crushed them, and let them begin fermenting on their own, they could create a kind of natural starter. By the 14th century, written references to early fermentation techniques appear in northern Italian agricultural texts, describing how to set aside small batches of grapes to awaken the must. This practice eventually evolved into what we now call the pied de cuve. The process is deceptively simple. A few crates of early harvested grapes are crushed by foot or pressed gently by hand. Their juice, skins, and seeds are placed into a small tank where the wild yeast on the skins begins feeding on the natural sugars. Within a day or two, the mixture begins to bubble. It smells warm, fruity, alive. It crackles faintly as tiny carbon dioxide bubbles rise through the skins. That bubbling mixture becomes a powerful tool. When the rest of the vineyard is finally harvested, winemakers pour this living starter into the larger vat. The wild yeast that grew strong in the small batch now spreads rapidly through the fresh must. It accelerates fermentation, protects the wine from harmful bacteria, and ensures that the process starts with strength and confidence. No laboratory yeast is needed. Nature has already prepared the army. Culturally, the pied de cuve represents trust. Trust in the land, trust in the season, and trust in the unseen life resting on each grape. Many Italian families still prepare it exactly as their grandparents did, gathering around small buckets and tanks in the early evening light. It begins with a rule so simple it feels almost wrong. Don't wash the grapes. Don't rinse away the dust. Don't try to make them look perfect. In traditional Italian winemaking, this single decision can determine the entire fate of the wine, and its origins reach back to the earliest days of the peninsula's winemaking history, long before anyone understood the science behind it. Evidence from Etruscan sites in Tuscany and Lazio, dating to around 800 to 500 BCE, shows harvested grapes placed directly into clay vessels without any form of washing. Later, in the writings of Roman agronomist Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella in the 1st century CE, we find the same instruction. Grapes should be cleaned but never washed before fermentation. Why? The Romans didn't know the word yeast, but they understood that the grapes carried something essential on their skin, something that allowed grape juice to transform into wine with no outside help. That something was wild yeast, and washing the grapes would erase it. Each grape enters the harvest coated in a faint bloom called the pruina, a natural waxy layer that traps wild yeast, pollen, and microorganisms drifting through the vineyard. These aren't contaminants. They are the lifeblood of natural fermentation. Remove them, and the juice becomes sterile, silent, lifeless. This is why Italian winemakers, from Piedmont's Langa to Sicily's Mount Etna, treat freshly picked grapes like newborns. They handle them gently. They pick during cool morning hours to avoid damaging the skins. They sort out rotten or moldy clusters by hand, but they never wash away the bloom, because that bloom holds the yeast strains unique to that vineyard, that season, that exact slice of land. Avoiding washing also preserves another vital element, the grape's natural microbiome. The wild yeast, bacteria, and fungi that live on the skin create complexity, depth, and terroir around brief-driven character. This is why a Sangiovese from Chianti Classico tastes different from one grown just 20 kilometers away. The yeast itself is part of the flavor. Keeping grapes unwashed is not laziness, it is reverence, a belief that the vineyard already contains everything needed for fermentation, flavor, and longevity. Step inside an Italian cellar during harvest, and you will hear it before you see it. A faint crackling like a fire whispering in the distance. It comes from the vats, where grapes rest not as juice, but whole. Skins, seeds, and sometimes stems all submerged together. This ancient method, known for thousands of years, is the backbone of Italian winemaking without added yeast or sugar. And it begins the moment the grapes surrendered their first drop of juice. The practice is older than the Roman Empire. Archaeologists have uncovered large stone and clay fermentation vessels in Sicily dating as far back as 4000 BCE, evidence that prehistoric communities fermented grapes with their skins intact. Later, the Romans documented the same technique in texts like Pliny the Elder's Natural History from the 1st century CE, describing fermentations in which skins floated to the top in a thick crust. Italians understood early that the skin was not waste. It was the soul of the grape. When grapes ferment with their skins, something remarkable happens. The wild yeast resting on the skins meets the sugar in the juice and awakens almost instantly. Bubbles form, heat builds, aromas rise. The skins also release tannins, antioxidants, and pigments that protect the fermenting wine from spoilage. Without commercial yeast or added sugar, these natural elements become shields. They stabilize the fermentation. They defend the must from harmful bacteria. They give the winemaker time. In red wines like Nebbiolo from Barolo, Sangiovese from Tuscany, or Nerello Mascalese from Mount Etna, skin fermentation is essential. It delivers structure, color, longevity, and the unmistakable grip that defines Italian reds. But even some whites, such as the orange wines of Friuli Venezia Giulia, rely on extended skin contact to bring depth and warmth without additives. Culturally, fermenting with skins is a ritual of transformation. Families gather around open vats. Children watch as the skins rise to the top in a thick, aromatic cap. Elders teach when to stir, when to wait, when to trust the sound and scent of the ferment rather than the clock. It is instinct passed down through centuries. And as the skins swell and release their final secrets into the deepening wine, another element rises in importance. Temperature. Quiet, invisible, but powerful enough to make or break the entire vintage. Walk into a traditional Italian wine cellar, and the first thing you'll notice is the smell. Warm wood, cool earth, faint sweetness, a whisper of something ancient. Then your eyes adjust to the dim light, and you see them. Massive wooden barrels stretching down long corridors stacked like sleeping giants. These barrels are more than vessels. They are living archives of Italy's oldest winemaking traditions, and for winemakers who refuse commercial yeast or added sugar, they are essential. The use of wooden barrels in Italy is centuries old. The Roman writer, Pliny the Elder, in the 1st century CE, noted that wines from northern Italy were often stored in wooden casks made from oak and chestnut, but the practice became deeply rooted during the Middle Ages, especially in regions like Tuscany, Piedmont, and Veneto, where cooperatives flourished and families passed barrel-making skills from father to son. By the 1400s, wine cellars across Florence and Siena were lined with botti grandi, enormous oval-shaped barrels that could hold thousands of liters. But why wood? And why does it matter for natural fermentation? Old barrels, especially those used for generations, are never sterile. Their microscopic pores house communities of native yeast and beneficial bacteria absorbed from decades of fermentations. These microorganisms cling to the inner walls of the wood, forming a quiet ecosystem that reawakens every time fresh wine enters. Unlike stainless steel, cold, smooth, and lifeless, old wood breathes. It allows slow oxygen exchange, encouraging wild yeast to thrive steadily instead of erupting too fast or weakening too soon. This stability is vital when the winemaker refuses to add commercial yeast. The barrel also protects the wine. Its tannins act as natural antioxidants, guarding the fermenting juice from harmful microbes and premature spoilage. A barrel that's been used for 10, 20, even 50 years no longer imparts strong wood flavors. Instead, it offers balance, structure, and subtle warmth. Some Italian families in Barolo and Montalcino still use barrels older than their grandparents, not out of nostalgia, but because those barrels hold the memory of every vintage they've ever touched. Culturally, old wooden barrels symbolize patience. They demand care. Hydration, cleaning, sealing. They require cool, stable cellar temperatures, often maintained in underground rooms, dating to the 16th and 17th centuries. They remind the winemaker that good wine is not rushed. It evolves. It listens to the seasons. It grows slowly in silence. Before thermometers, before stainless steel tanks, before winemaking became a science, Italians understood a simple truth. Wine lives or dies by the warmth around it, and when no commercial yeast or sugar is added, the stakes become even higher. Some of the earliest clues to this knowledge come from Roman texts like Columella's De Re Rustica, 1st century CE, where he advised storing fermenting wine in the coolest rooms of the villa to avoid spoilage. But the most vivid evidence lies beneath the earth. Across Tuscany, Piedmont, and Umbria, you'll find cellars carved directly into rock as far back as the 15th century, built not for beauty, but for stability. These underground sanctuaries remain between 12 degrees Celsius and 16 degrees Celsius, or around 54 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. No electricity. No machines. Just the steadiness of stone. Inside these cellars, time moves differently. You notice how sound travels slowly. You feel how the air holds its breath. Wild yeast thrives in this environment because nothing startles it. Warm temperatures would push the yeast too quickly, creating harsh aromas or exhausting the ferment before the sugars are fully transformed. Cold temperatures would lull the yeast to sleep, leaving the juice vulnerable to unwanted bacteria. A steady middle ground keeps the fermentation alive, calm and confident. Generations of Italian winemakers learned to watch the cellar the way shepherds read the weather. A candle placed near the wall revealed drafts. Clay jars sweating in the corner signaled rising humidity. If storms rolled through the hills above, the family would rush to close upper vents so the sudden chill wouldn't slip inside. Keeping the temperature stable became an act of vigilance, not convenience. Cellars in Montepulciano and Barolo still show this philosophy. Narrow tunnels prevent warm air from circulating too quickly. Thick stone walls soften the shock of seasonal changes. Some families store water jugs along the floor to regulate humidity, a technique documented in rural records from the 17th century. Each detail supports the same goal: protect the yeast, protect the wine, and culturally this constancy reflects something deeper. Italians believe wine mirrors the environment that shapes it. A calm cellar produces a calm wine. A chaotic temperature produces a chaotic fermentation. When fermentation begins, something remarkable happens inside the vat. As the wild yeast feeds on the natural sugars, heat and carbon dioxide rise through the juice. The grape skins, seeds, and tiny fragments of pulp lift to the surface and form a thick, floating mass known as the cap. It looks like a dark, wrinkled crust. It smells warm, alive, slightly sweet. And it becomes the winemaker's daily responsibility, a task performed for thousands of years in Italy's oldest wine regions. The origins of this practice go back far beyond written texts. Archaeological evidence from Sicily and southern Italy, dating to around 4000 to 2000 BCE, shows large clay fermentation vessels stained with dark rings near the top, suggesting ancient winemakers knew the cap formed and needed attention. Later Roman writers like Pliny the Elder and Columella described how skins rose during fermentation and had to be pressed down with care. They didn't know the science, but they understood the craft. Why stir the cap? Without modern yeast or additives, the cap becomes more than just floating grape skins. It is a protective blanket of flavor, tannin, and color. But if it stays dry for too long, oxygen reaches it easily. Dry skins invite unwanted bacteria. They can spoil the entire vat. Each day, sometimes twice a day, Italian winemakers break through the cap and push it gently back into the fermenting juice. The method varies from region to region. In Piedmont, winemakers press it down with long wooden poles called pig age. In Tuscany, families have used handheld paddles for generations. On Mount Etna, some still punch it down by hand, feeling the warmth of the fermentation rise through their fingers. Stirring the cap redistributes heat, keeps the skins wet, and extracts deeper color and structure. Without added sugar or commercial yeast, these elements become essential. They keep fermentation steady and help the wine protect itself. A well-managed cap produces a wine that can age gracefully for decades. A neglected cap produces a wine that collapses before it ever reaches a bottle. This daily ritual becomes a kind of conversation between the winemaker and the fermenting must. The sound of the cap breaking, the scent released into the cellar, the temperature shift felt through the paddle, all these details guide the next decision. With each punchdown, the winemaker shapes the wine's future, not through force, but through presence and attentiveness. Without added sugar or commercial yeast to rely on, they needed grapes that could carry the process on their own. Over centuries, families noticed that certain varieties held more natural sweetness and ripened with remarkable consistency. In Tuscany, Piedmont, Sicily, and Veneto, grapes like Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Nero d'Avola, Primitivo, and Garganega became trusted companions because they offered what natural fermentation demands most: strength. Sugar is the yeast's only fuel. High-sugar grapes allow wild yeast to take its time, working through the juice gradually and completely. The result is a stable fermentation from the first bubbling hours to the final quiet days. Nothing artificial needs to enter the vat. The grape provides everything the wine will become. These varieties also thrive in Italy's long-growing season. As late summer heat lingers, sugars rise, and acidity remains firm. That balance gives natural wines vibrancy, depth, and the ability to age with grace. Selecting these grapes is a practical decision rooted in experience. Generations of winemakers saw that when these varieties filled the vats, the fermentations finished cleanly and the wines held their structure for years. And once the grapes are chosen and crushed, the winemaker prepares for the slowest phase of all. In a traditional Italian cellar, fermentation unfolds at a pace set by the land rather than the clock. When no commercial yeast or sugar is added, the process depends entirely on the strength of the wild yeast and the steadiness of the environment. The goal is not speed, the goal is completion. Slow fermentation has been part of Italian winemaking since ancient times, and historical records show why it endured. Roman agricultural texts from the 1st century CE, including Columella's De Re Rustica, advised farmers to keep fermenting wine in cooler rooms. This simple instruction extended fermentation naturally and helped prevent spoilage. By the Middle Ages, the knowledge had deepened. Cellars carved into rock across Umbria, Tuscany, and Piedmont maintained low, stable temperatures, allowing fermentation to stretch over several weeks. These long fermentations were not accidental, they were encouraged. A gradual fermentation gives the wild yeast time to work through every sugar molecule at a steady rhythm. The flavors grow more layered. The texture becomes fuller, shaped slowly by the skins and the constant presence of the cap. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. The yeast remains active longer, keeping harmful microbes from gaining a foothold. The wine becomes more stable simply because the yeast is given space to finish its work. In natural winemaking, a fast fermentation can be risky. Excess heat builds. Aromas lose their clarity. The yeast may exhaust itself before the sugars are fully converted. Italians noticed these problems centuries ago and adapted by letting the wine take its time. The quiet days in the cellar became part of the craft, a period when families monitored the bubbling must with the same attention fishermen gave the tides. As the weeks pass, the bubbling softens and the cap slowly sinks. The wine beneath grows darker, calmer, more certain of itself. When the last sugars disappear and the cellar falls silent, the transformation is complete. The wine has arrived without a single additive, and from here, the story of Italian winemaking shifts once again, moving from the stillness of fermentation to the long rest that prepares the wine for the outside world. But what if the secret to Italian survival isn't in bunkers, but in their kitchens? Discover the timeless foods Italians stockpile and why they're built to last through anything.